Michael Moore, thanks so much for joining me on Up Front.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You, of course, made a very famous movie called Fahrenheit 9/11, which criticized the U.S.'s response to the attacks of September 11, 2001. Israel is now calling October 7th their own 9/11. What do you make of that comparison?
Well, it's ironically, it's a very apt description in the sense in terms of how the United States responded to 9/11, very much in a rush toward revenge. It was a sense of something like this would never happen. And then it happens. And the fact that it took hours before help arrived, I think has discombobulated a lot of people in a sense of kind of utter horror and fear. Human beings do not act well when they come from a place of fear. So I think I understand all the initial responses, having gone through that time and seen all the mistakes we made, first invading Afghanistan, then invading Iraq. For what?
That's the interesting question, the for what? The what was this really about question in regard to 9/11 led people to say, okay, this was maybe just a pretext, for invading Iraq. Do you worry that the Israeli government may similarly use October 7th as a pretext to take over more of Gaza, to expand in the West Bank, or maybe go to war with Iran? Could this moment of horror and fear turn into an opportunistic moment for something else?
Well, I think it already has. Most people on the right or the left, pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-human life, Netanyahu has to go. The people were not protected. What was he doing? Why had they pulled the army back? We know one reason they were pulled back into the West Bank was to support the settlers and their violence against the Palestinians. He's going to have to answer for this. It's not going to go well for him. It's very hard to trust things that are coming out of his administration. The slaughter that we're witnessing now is so, I don't know how to put words to it, frankly. I mean, just what's happened the last few nights, but really what's happened the last few decades. And that I, as an American, I'm helping to fund that. The United States is the bank.
Let me ask you about that funding, Michael. That's so important, right? Because on the one hand, as you mentioned earlier, President Biden says, hey, Israel, don't make the mistakes we made. We went looking for justice and we made mistakes. At the same time, he's asking for more military aid. He said that, innocents being killed is just the price of waging a war. You can't square that circle easily. What do you do? What should the U.S. be doing? Well,
we should not be trying to increase the slaughter. We should not be funding the war. How do you justify the slaughter of children? And some of these nights, half of the dead, half of the wounded are children. What are we getting back? What are we trying to do? What did the children do? And how are we defending Israel by having more dead children? And anybody who can't say right now, especially people who say, oh, I support Israel and I will, defend Israel, and then support and fund the massacre of innocent civilians and children. You have no credibility then when you say that you support Israel.
Well, that kind of hypocrisy, that kind of contradiction isn't just with people, it's with governments too, including our government. I mean, Human Rights Watch put it perfectly. They said the hypocrisy and double standards of Western states are flagrant and obvious, and that, of course, the U.S. and other Western governments have to apply the same principles regarding Russian atrocities in Ukraine as they would with, quote, Israel's brutal disregard for civilian life in Gaza. It seems like we pick and choose when we're going to be outraged, when we're going to intervene, when we're going to have a moral critique. Would it be fair to say that the U.S. foreign policy position is fundamentally hypocritical? It
is, but I think what's really at the core always of our foreign policy is what's best for us. And so Israel and from the very beginning of the creation of Israel, the American government and the American military has always seen this as a good thing for us, that we have this base there, that we have all the kind of intelligence apparatus and everything, all the things that Israel does basically to make sure that the oil supply is there in the Middle East. We're not going to be impeded by this. And I think too, and I've had Israeli friends say to me, we get that what's really behind this, either politically or militarily wise. The United States has been using Israel in that way for many, many years.
Another thing that comes to mind, though, is the role that the media plays. And again, I think back to your work. In 9/11, the media helped beat the drum for war. Post 9/11, they beat the drum for war in Iraq. They beat the drum for war in Afghanistan. They continue to beat those war drums. Similarly, today, we see the media adopting pro-Israel approach, pro-war approach, not as uniformly as post 9/11. There are voices urging caution, but at least we see more dissent than we did 20 years ago. Has the media learned a lesson? Have we learned a lesson from before?
I think so. I think because of the what's still going on back and forth about the hospital that was bombed, was it an Israeli rocket? Was it a Palestinian rocket? That'll all come out, by the way. We will all know the truth of everything. I'm confident of that. But in the meantime, the New York Times and the others have had to sort of back away. We got to make sure we have to say every time anything that comes out of Gaza now from the Palestinians, we have to say, oh, this has not been independently confirmed. Which, right, we should all know that anyways as consumers of media. But I still don't hear anybody in the media, whenever something comes out of Netanyahu's mouth, whatever his government is saying, it should also be have the caveat attached to it. We have not been able to independently confirm what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying, and so we're in the fog of all this right now, and we don't know a lot of what. But everything that he and his government, very right-wing government, has been saying and doing must be treated with a lot of skepticism.
Absolutely, and it's a right-wing government. And so sometimes with right-wing governments, right-wing media outlets are very gentle. The thing about this case is that it's not just the right-wing media that's not being sufficiently critical. It's everybody. I mean, look at supposedly centrist mainstream media outlets like CNN. I mean, they're still branding their TV coverage Israel at war, which seems to be taking sides. It doesn't feel very neutral to me. A BBC headline about an Israeli attack on Jabalia mentioned the massive crater the strike left, but they ignored the more than 50 people that the Gaza Health Ministry says were also killed. Mainstream media makes all kinds of dubious decisions about how to frame a conflict, and you know very well as a filmmaker that the way you frame a story is how people understand the story. How have people's perceptions been influenced by the way the media has framed this?
Well, I think very much so. But again, the majority of Americans don't support this slaughter.
Yeah.
And they want the humanitarian aid in now, not 20 trucks a day or 50 trucks a day, 500 trucks a day. That is where the American people are at. And I want people around the world who might be listening to this to understand that my fellow Americans actually kind of do get this. And when the big graphics come on the screen, Israel at war, you just have to stop and think for a second. Oh, yeah, the Palestinians, they have all those fighter jets. They have all those bombers. The big Palestinian Navy with all those.
Right, right.
When you say the word war, what does define war? People have a right to defend themselves. But that's not what's going on now. If you're killing children in my name with my money, that's not a war to defend yourself. That looks like something else. That looks like a group of people, 2 to 2.5 million people of color that are being pushed, as they say, into the sea or into the desert to get rid of them in some way. Certainly is what it looks like. And you can't wake up every morning and see the bodies of these dead children being pulled from the rubble. A lot of what Netanyahu is doing was very similar to what Bush was doing. He messed up. Bush paid no attention. They knew an attack was going to happen. They didn't prepare for it. And now then Bush tried to save himself by, let's go to war. Let's defend America. And yet we're not any safer now as Americans than we were back then. None of us are safe if our response is more killing and more death.
I'm looking at Biden's request from Congress for more money. It seems like more killing and more death is inevitable. Biden's asked Congress for $14 billion for Israel's defense. The U.S. already provides Israel more than $3 billion a year. He's also asked for more money for Ukraine. What's interesting to me is when Biden made the case for this spending, he did more than just make a moral argument. He did more than just make a political argument. He made an economic argument. On October 19th, he talked about the number of U.S. states that those weapons would be made in, as if to say, this isn't just good for defense, this is a jobs program. What do you think of the argument that making more weapons is also good for the average working American?
We don't fall for that anymore. The majority of people don't fall for that. And I got to tell you, Biden, the things that he said in the sort of position he's taken, I'm pretty sure what he's doing privately behind the scenes with Netanyahu. And I know they tried to slow things down a bit to try to get humanitarian aid in, to try and get hostages released. It's release the hostages, pull the rug out from underneath the Netanyahu government that's trying to justify the massacre of children. I would just strongly encourage that, and to say both sides have to have a ceasefire. The killing has to stop.
Last week, the White House press secretary was asked if President Biden thinks anti-Israel protesters are extremists. Rather than answer the question, she called the protesters anti-Semitic and compared them to neo-Nazis who marched in Charlottesville back in 2017. There's an obvious divide on the left between supporters of Israel and supporters of Palestinians. But this is a Democratic White House calling critics of Israeli policy, who on most other issues would probably be allies, anti-Semites. What do you say to people like the press secretary who make those kinds of claims?
My podcast team, my producers, went down to Grand Central Station in New York City. New people had family members who had been killed on October 7th that wanted to make it clear that their deceased loved one would not want children being killed because they were killed.
Yeah.
And I think this is very frustrating for Israel, the Israeli government. We've had a couple of generations of young people, not just in the U.S., but in Israel and in Palestine and around the world, where they kind of get what's going on now. And so you're just not going to be able to make stuff up. And I'm very disappointed in President Biden for using this language. And I just don't think Netanyahu and his gang are going to get away with this.
Wow. You can tell Michael Moore is really hurt by what he's seen, by the slaughtering of the children, by the civilians and the number of deaths that they've undertaken, as well as by Joe Biden and some of the things that he said and the lies that are coming out of the mouth of Netanyahu. So he speaks about Israel using the comparison of 9/11 to what happened to them versus Hamas. And yes, revenge is a very evil trait, especially in human beings, as Michael Moore says. And he says that humans don't make very good decisions out of fear. And that's correct. So never, as a side note, never make decisions out of fear. Always make decisions from a place of strength and goals. And it does seem to me that the Israeli government is using this as a pretext to genocide the Palestinian people, and at the very least, to ethnically cleanse them from the land, which is what they've wanted to do ever since the formation of Israel from the Balfour Agreement in 1947. Also, I've heard and I've seen that Israel knew that this was coming. I heard Egypt knew and that they warned Israel that this was going to happen, that Hamas was going to attack them on the Israeli side. I think that they allowed this to happen because then they would have the pretext that they needed for these atrocities that we're seeing and the real-time ethnic cleansing that's going on, as well as the war crimes that are going on to take place. Plus, it's also good for political expediency for him to try to gather support and get the country to rally around this war because they've all been hurt inside of Israel. And also for his political future and to keep his behind out of jail. Michael Moore says Netanyahu needs to go. Not only do I agree with that, but most of the people in Israel agree with that. They've been protesting against him. Every time I look around, they're protesting against him because he's not doing anything to try to get the hostages out. And yes, the news and the media really formulates the way that you think about things and the way that you see things. And what they've really done a great job of is framing this, that this started October 7th. Here's a news flash. The Palestinian people have been occupied for 67 years. You see what I'm saying? So that's the reason why they have what's called resistance movements, because they're resisting being occupied on their own land. Because they were there. They are the ones that had to be displaced for Israel to actually have a state. What's really a sobering reality for the citizens of the United States is that your tax dollars is what's paying for the slaughter that we're seeing on television. It's paying for the many children that we've seen killed and injured. And when I say injured, I'm talking about people losing legs and arms and things of that nature. 70% of the people that have been killed are children and women and older people. So I'm sure that can't make you feel good. And the hypocrisy of the United States, hey, that's their trademark. But the thing is that they're going to learn that hypocrisy game that they play. The other countries, aside from the European countries, you know what I'm saying? They're not playing that hypocrisy. They're calling it out, especially Erdogan of Turkey. He's calling it out. Go watch my videos that I've got up on Erdogan. I mean, he's letting it go. And they're just not playing that game of hypocrisy. The hypocrisy that the United States shows between what Russia has done and what Israel has done is night and day, even though you can see a lot of the same things being done, like using water and food and energy as weapons of war. They were all over Russia for that, and now they say nothing when Israel does it. It's very sad. It's very sad. It's very telling, and it's honorless. One of the reasons why the United States supports Israel, basically no matter what they do, because it's good for them. Because remember, they like to be in a position of domination. So that allows them to have a base there right in the middle of all those other Arab countries where all that oil is, so that the oil supply can continue to go. They've got their military bases there, and then they get intelligence as well from that area. So they can continue their command and control and colonization of other nations. And another thing is the majority of Americans do not support the slaughter of innocent people and of the Palestinians. Joe Biden has given $14 billion to Israel in order to fight against, 2 million Palestinians in Gaza? 5 million total when you put together Gaza and the West Bank. They don't, the Palestinians, you guys, if you guys didn't know this, they don't have a standing army. They do not have F-35s and all these fighter jets. They do not have tanks. They don't have, submarines and aircraft carriers. They don't have any of that. It's like, it doesn't make sense. Why does Israel need all of this money and all of these weapons and things to beat these Palestinians that have nothing? It's just very, very telling, very insidious. And then Biden with a huge blunder, telling the United States people that, hey, making weapons for killing people is good for the U.S. economy. So just support Israel, support this war. It's going to allow us all to make money and live just a little bit better of a lifestyle. I mean, that earns you no points on earth with people of honor, and definitely doesn't earn you any points with the Father up in heaven. And then they call the protesters who are protesting what they're seeing of these civilians being killed, they call them anti-Semitic. It's crazy. They're saying that they're racist against Israel because they don't want to see innocent people killed. Because you guys know, I don't use the word anti-Semitic. I use the word racist because then you can see how it doesn't even make sense. Basically, what Biden and his administration is saying, that anybody that supports the Palestinian people is a racist against Israel and the Israelis, the Khazars. Does that make any sense to you guys? Does that make sense to anybody? How is that being racist against you? Because they don't want to see innocent people killed. So whenever you see the word anti-Semitic, always put in the word racist and then you analyze it for yourself. 8 times out of 10, it's not going to even make sense. And I thought it was very heartfelt and telling when Michael Moore said the people that were killed in Israel by Hamas, they wouldn't want innocent children to be killed in their name because they were killed. You know what I mean? Would you want that? If you were killed wrongly, would you want innocent children to be killed to try to make amends for that? I'm betting that most of you wouldn't, especially my subscribers. You guys wouldn't be going for that because that's a lack of honor and the Father's not going to bless that. One of the biggest things that I got out of this interview that I see now as I look more and more into this, Joe Biden is going to pay for the things that he said and this support and turning a blind eye and the hypocrisy with the presidency. You heard it here. He will not win the presidency coming up if he's able to run for president, which is still debatable. We're still in the throes of that. All praises to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is Crown Prince Media. I am the Crown Prince. Let's go.
No one can do it better.